Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Coming up on today's show, we'll be taking a look at why the corporate media continues to give a microphone to the crazy right-wing extremists. And the White House representatives just passed a huge giveaway to the Koch brothers and all of the Wall Street types, and we'll give you all the details about that big Wall Street giveaway. And the Democrats in California are moving further and further to the right, and we'll tell you why this is bad for the entire country. We have all that and more coming up right now. Just remember, you stepped in to the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
The tobacco industry employed more dirty tricks to hide the dangers of their product than almost any other industry. They were the propaganda specialist. And now the energy industry has decided that the best way to be successful is to take a page out of Big Tobacco's playbook. I have Howard Nations with me now to talk about the energy industry and what they're up to all over the world. Howard, it appears that the tobacco industry has taken everything they learned about how to hustle America and how to hustle the world, and now they've implanted it. They've given that information to the energy industry, and now there's a big hustle going on by them. There's an article by Michael Clare. He's author of The Race for What's Left. Interesting article where he talks about how the energy industry is now finding that common ground on how to hustle the world. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, this is nothing new to us, Mike. What happened is the tobacco industry in the United States and in Europe met regulatory restrictions. They had the litigations, and they decided that what they need to do is to sell more in developing nations where they do not have regulations, they don't have a threat of litigation, but the demand is strong. The result of that, incidentally, according to the World Health Organization, is that by 2030, there will be 8 million people per year dying as a result of smoking illnesses worldwide. So that's where we start.
So the tobacco industry left developed countries, and then they went to developing third world countries,
right,
primarily Southeast Asia, places like that, and started killing them by the millions there because it's all about how much money they can make. It doesn't really have anything to do with how many people they kill. And now we're seeing the energy industry do the same thing. The climate change issue has become an incredible problem for the energy industry. So now we see them making this twist to the third world country too, right?
Yes, and this is nothing new for us. As attorneys, we see this happen. I recall very well when the energy industry was making pesticides that were banned in the United States. But the same pesticides, after being banned here, would be sold in Costa Rica, where they would be sprayed on the grapes. The grapes, in turn, are sold in the United States. We called it the circle of poison. They had no compunction about that. Those same energy companies today, as the climate change regulations begin to take hold in the West and in Europe, are getting a declining demand for fossil fuels. So they're doing the same thing the tobacco industry did. They're accelerating their sales in developing nations where the demand is strong, regulations are none or weak, and they have absolutely no concern regarding the huge increase in climate-altering carbon emissions, the same as the tobacco company just totally lacked concern for smoke-related injuries and deaths.
So it doesn't make any difference to these executives for the energy industry, whether it's Exxon or the Koch industry, whatever. It makes no difference to them. That the net effect is they're going to continue to accelerate climate change. It doesn't make any difference that it's going to affect their children and their grandchildren, as long as they can make as much as possible right now. Hell with the next generation. They're just going to pull it off in third world countries. That's kind of what their attitude now is, isn't it?
Yes, the New York Times reported that the industry is now spending billions of dollars in advertising and marketing and moving into third world nations. In the fossil fuel industry with oil and coal and natural gas is expanding exponentially. They're ensuring the growth of energy in these developing nations where they're unregulated. And it's gotten
well,
to the
talk
point,
about that. Talk about the fact that they're unregulated allows them to spread bribe money around to public officials, and they get away with a lot more in these third world countries. That's what we saw with tobacco. That's what we see with the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry can kill people by the thousands over here with one of their drugs. It's taken off the market here, and they simply take that same killer drug to a third world country, and they bribe their way in to be able to sell it. And that's what we saw the tobacco industry doing. Now we're seeing that with the energy industry, basically, aren't we?
And this is such an incredible marketplace for them because 95% of the projected growth in industry, in the economic energy consumption, is in developing nations, 95%. So they are in there just en masse, and they're doing exactly that. Now, you want to hear the ultimate hypocrisy. The CEO of Exxon says that there is a humanitarian imperative that they should deliver. I know, seriously. There's a humanitarian imperative that they should deliver this energy to these developing nations because they need it a lot more than they need to be able to breathe.
Yes, and this great humanitarian Tillerson is the same guy. He was the CEO who said, look, I don't mind you fracking everywhere else, companies, but don't frack in my backyard. He was the one that defends fracking, except he doesn't want them fracking in his backyard because he knows the fracking poisons his water, does a whole litany of destructive kind of things to the neighborhood. But this is the guy who says, this great humanitarian, we have to go to Southeast Asia, build refineries. They're building refineries by the dozens, aren't they?
They really are, and they're cooperating with the countries themselves. They have big deals going in China and in Singapore and in Qatar and all over the world, literally, but mainly it's in Southeast Asia where they have increased not only the oil and gas and liquefied natural gas, but also coal has moved heavily into China. Go ahead.
You know what's interesting about it, Howard, is the Koch brothers' father, these billionaire inheritance babies, David and Charles Koch, made all their money from Daddy. Daddy made his money by going to the USSR when it was communist Russia and making a deal with Stalin, the same kind of deal. It let us build you refineries, and they actually put Russia into the refinery business. The Koch brothers did that. So I'm sure they're comfortable doing that with China or whoever may one day be pointing bombs our way. They don't have any problems with that, I'm certain.
Yeah, they have absolutely no problems because they've gone, for example, just take coal, for example. In 2007, there was no U.S. coal in exports to China. There were 7 million tons in 2012. The exports to India, China, South Korea have increased by 1,000%. That's just coal, not to mention all the other energy sources that are being funded straight into China. And as you diminish carbon emissions in the U.S., as Obama has stated, he brags about diminishing carbon emissions in the U.S., but the long-term overall impact is you have the same emissions in Asia, which contribute to a thing called the global climate.
And all he has to do, frankly, is take their government contracts away from them, hit them with a punitive tax. He could take their subsidies away from them. He could stop this. This Congress could stop this by punishing these basically corporate criminals who understand that they are melting this planet. They're just not doing it in the U.S. now. They've moved to third world countries, and they understand what this is going to do to their children and their children's children. Howard Nations, ugly as it can be, it is a real story out there. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, Mike.
People like Michelle Bachmann and Louis Gohmert never have anything of substance to add to a real debate. It's all crazy talk. Yet the corporate media seems to love these oddballs on the air. This helps spread their crazy backwards belief all over the country. Joining me now to tell us why the media loves the crazy Tea Party is blogger Heather Digby Parton. Heather, I used to believe the discussion that would come from the media about their discussion about, gee whiz, we have to tell both sides of the story. We have to tell all sides of the story. There has to be an equivalence. There has to be a balance. And having come through journalism school myself at University of Florida, that's what we used to hear all the time. Now I think what I'm really seeing is more, that's just a rationale. That's just a way to rationalize the idea that we want to put every crazy that we can possibly put together in a paddy wagon. We want to put every crazy we can on the air because the truth is it helps sell. Isn't that kind of isn't this a big lie about, right now we're seeing it with Cheney and Wolfowitz all over the media, like we have to give everybody a fair shot. Not really. There is no equivalence to a lie, is there?
No, there isn't. I mean, that's been obvious for a long time, going all the way back to the 90s. I mean, I think that was when the crazy really accelerated in politics, and you could see it happening then. There's a sort of, you can feel it. There's a febrile excitement when this crazy starts to churn itself, and you can see how, the media is drawn to that. And I think it's also an easy way for them to not have to confront the right-wing crazies who have, after all, spent the last 30 to 40 years demonizing the media as a, quote, liberal media. And as a result, I think the media is, even those with good intentions are reluctant to actually confront that and say, no, this is the fact. You are crazy. This is way out of line. And basically, there is no equivalence between the two sides on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, let's do a show because this bonehead over here believes that the sun won't come up tomorrow because physics has changed, the physical world has changed. So he believes that. Therefore, let's put him on with 10 scientists just because he believes that. Now, if you really drill down and you talk to people that write about this type of thing, as you do. And I know that these other people that analyze this, whether it's Media Matters or whatever, it really comes down a lot of times to money issues. You have the MBA that's on the 50th floor saying, "Gee whiz, when Jerry Springer was around, we could really light up the TV set with crazy, And so now all they've done is move Jerry Springer to the nightly news, and they figured out that's a pretty good formula for making money, isn't it?"
Absolutely, and we have proof of this during the run-up to the Iraq War, when people were trying to actually show both sides of the story, which was the anti-war marches and what have you that were happening, the view that Iraq was not a reasonable policy. You had places like MSNBC, which now are considered to be on the left side of the dial, shutting down people like Phil Donahue, saying that, they're getting big ratings with the flag waving and all the, this hyper patriotism that was going on during that period. And they basically shut down any dissent on that. I mean, they went that far. So sure, they want that excitement. It's definitely good for ratings. You can see what's happening right now on some of the cable news networks with this, this latest news coming out of Iraq. So of course they do that, and it's really, the tabloid side of it goes all the way back to the Clinton scandals, and particularly Monica Lewinsky, where that absolutely dominated the news for.
Well, they figured it out, didn't they? They figured out that, look, no matter how mundane the issue is, if we make it into an issue, it's going to sell a lot.
Right.
And so now you have this situation with corporate media to where in the 1980s we used to have, there was about 55, almost around 60 organizations that owned independent organizations. They owned news by way of newspapers and television and radio and magazines. Now all that has been consolidated to where you have 4 or 5, maybe 5 at the very best. And so I guess when they started killing the news department, if we're going to kill news department, we're not going to really have rational news. We're not. What used to be 60 Minutes, for example, is no longer 60 Minutes. It's an embarrassment for 60 Minutes. I mean, the people who started 60 Minutes have got to be horribly embarrassed by what 60 Minutes has become, because now it is infotainment, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I mean, look, all you have to do is look at the Laura Logan scandal.
Good example.
Happened just recently, where you can see exactly what direction they were going in. And I'm not criticizing Logan's journalistic abilities there.
Well, allow me to do that, would you please? Because I will criticize it. I think she's a failure. The idea that she's even back in the scene is an embarrassment. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, it is shocking. Oh, and she was being groomed as this very, as a news celebrity, which is what's happened to most, what used to be called news anchors. I mean, could a guy like Walter Cronkite be, considered that, with the same reverence that he was back then? I don't think so. There'd be some guy, some crazy right winger screaming in his face, and reduced to, having some cage matches on TV. So, this whole tabloidization, I guess, is one way of looking at it, has really dumbed down the news to the point where now it's just a he said, she said. It's this, they've come to this point where basically everything is a matter of opinion, and that just actually is not the case. There is actually.
Well, you talk about Walter Cronkite, for example, or Ed Morrow, or Huntley and Brinkley. First of all, they wouldn't be allowed on the air because they weren't what you would call attractive. You couldn't put them on the air because they didn't look like a celebrity. They didn't they didn't look like they should be on a red carpet walk somewhere in Hollywood. And so what the MBAs up on the 50th floor have figured out is it doesn't really make any difference what the talking head is saying, as long as A, they say what we tell them to say, and B, they look like a celebrity. And that's where news has gone. So in comes your talking point about that's the perfect setup. That's the perfect setup for all of this new space that the real Walking Dead crazy has to get on the air these days, don't they?
Exactly. I mean, there's an endless supply of desire to see these people, apparently, and it makes for good television. And I'll tell you, there's one man that we should really look to as the person who has made this happen, and his name is Roger Ailes, and he's a television genius, an evil genius, but a television genius nonetheless. I mean, he started out back in the late 60s. He was a straight up entertainment guy, and he got into politics, and he has created this world. I mean, not single-handedly, but he certainly has led the way. He is very, very good. If you look at his network, you can turn it off and not listen to the sound and just watch it and see it as purely as a political pageant. He knows exactly how to make that work, and I think everybody else is just kind of scrambling, trying to catch up to him.
Yeah, the alternative reality where the Fox and Friends, where you might actually look at it and, honest to God, believe that you're watching Saturday Night Live.
It's true.
And so I do too. I mean, when I don't know whether you know this, but I used to make appearances on Fox, and I found myself laughing then. Listen, Heather, thank you for joining us. Okay, your writing is always great. You have an open seat anytime you want to appear on this program. Okay.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Bye-bye. The Republican-controlled House recently passed a massive bill that not only guts the Dodd-Frank bill, but also includes massive giveaways to the Koch brothers. The House has clearly lost its collective mind, and I have David Haynes with me to tell you what's going on. David, Republican-led House is really, really busy trying to please Wall Street again, and unfortunately, the Democrats are kind of going along with it. They're trying to give the Koch brothers kind of a relief bill here, aren't they? I mean, can you imagine these billionaires worth $100 billion, and you have our Beltway congressmen and senators actually wanting to give the Koch brothers more money with this relief bill?
Is it any coincidence coming right off the heels of the McCutcheon decision, and there's unlimited campaign financing and contributions essentially that are now available, that the Republicans and even some Democrats, as you say, want to give a laundry list or a wish list to the Koch brothers and to Wall Street of everything that they want? I mean, do we have amnesia as to what happened and caused the financial meltdown and the real estate crisis, which just destroyed the middle class in America? Here we go again.
Yeah, the people who lost their homes, the people who were foreclosed on, the people whose their pension programs went belly up, the people who were stolen from Wall Street, they don't forget, but it seems, and they don't have amnesia, but it sure seems like our Beltway congressmen and senators do. Tell the viewers what it is. What is this big prize they want to give away to the Koch brothers and to all of Wall Street in one sense?
Well, basically what they want is no regulation. They want to play by their own rules, not have regulation under these complex derivative swaps be able to do offshore trading and all the things that got us into the real estate crisis in the first place. There were loopholes going all the way back into the 1990s when the Republicans allowed Wall Street to just play fast and loose, and it got us into this terrible problem in the first place with crazy escalation in the housing market and then the inevitable crash that came with the middle class being squeezed all along. So here we are back again with Congress basically just giving the Koch brothers and their Wall Street cronies what they want. This is
David, they're unapologetic about it. They don't seem. It doesn't seem to matter to them at all that one of the bills for this is incredible. They call it the London Whale Loophole Act, and that is where you had J.P. Morgan that involved trades that cost $6.2 billion to investors. And they knew why the trades took place because they were basically illegal trades. And they involved things like derivatives and swaps and CDOs. Cost investors $6.2 billion. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody suffers at all for that trade. But this bill that they want to now pass inside the Beltway actually says, yes, you can do that. I mean, seriously, that's how crazy this has become, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, it's this offshore loophole that you said, and it's basically just giving these guys an excuse wherever they can to, do this financial trading complex stuff that they want to do with no regulation from the government at all. And it's the Main Street that's going to get burned, and Wall Street's going to continue to take the risk and fly high.
Okay, so here we are. We've got. We believe, the average American believes, that there are now things in place that will prevent the same kind of burn down that we had last time. The answer is not only are there not things in place, but the problem has actually been made worse. And one thing that they're trying to do is to say, look, let's take energy derivatives, for example. As long as you take your energy derivatives and you don't build them here and you don't create them here and they don't have a home base in the United States, you're welcome to do all of this offshore. You can simply hide it in the Isle of Man. You can hide it in the Grand Cayman Islands, create your mechanism there, and still fleece the American public without any kind of regulations. Isn't that kind of what this is all drilled down to?
Absolutely. Companies like Exxon and Enron, as you said, on the energy derivatives, this is a wish list for them of something that they wanted. And here it was in 2010 when we at least put in some decent regulations and protections under Dodd-Frank. All that's being rolled back just a short 4 years later. And it's similar to the offshore loopholes, which are given to all of these corporations so they're not paying into the American tax base like the rest of us.
Okay, let me talk about how crazy this has become. You actually there's laws that say if a CEO or somebody, an insider trader, somebody working for a corporation is under investigation by the FBI for fraud or has been sanctioned for fraud, that logically maybe doesn't it make sense that we shouldn't let that person back into the business to run things like CDOs and derivatives? We ought to have something that prevents it. As a matter of fact, what we have done is we've allowed these same frauds, these same criminals, to actually sit on the committees that decide what's illegal and what's not illegal, the CFTC, right? Now, we've said, hey, come on in. You're criminal. Why don't you sit on our board that decides what happens if criminals do wrong things? I mean, isn't that how crazy this has become?
It's this capitalistic cronyism, and essentially it's the fox watching the hen house. And as you said, we have some of the worst offenders are supposedly watching the shop. Would this be allowed in the fields of law or medicine? If you've been convicted of fraud, would you be allowed to practice? No, of course not. But why is it that for some reason when it comes to the financial fat cats, the rules don't apply?
And I want to be real clear. This is as much, let me just tell you something, this is as much Wall Street Democrats as it is Republicans. If you think for a second that right now the run-of-the-mill Democrat has your interest on economic issues, you are kidding yourselves. If you think the Republicans do, you are really out in la-la land. But don't believe for a second that the Democrats are pushing back enough to really change all this. They have become captured by Wall Street the same way that the Republicans have. As a matter of fact, as this progresses, we're seeing that moving into the Hillary Clinton race, we see it's going to continue because Hillary Clinton is just as much a Wall Street Democrat as Bill Clinton was. And we often forget Bill Clinton is the one who brought the Democrats into this love affair with Wall Street. So I don't see this getting any better unless we make a statement this time around. No, we don't want more of the same. David Haynes, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Pat.
Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power and programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable. We perpetuate a culture of crime all the way from Wall Street right down to the main street in our hometowns. It's worse than it has been since FDR took control of the problem and said we can't count on industry taking care of the American labor. They probably have already engaged into some type of criminal cover-up, and the law prohibits the government from even doing anything about it.
Catch America's lawyer Mike Papantonio on YouTube at youtube.com/GoLeftTV.
Howard Dean developed a 50-state strategy back in 2004 where he told Democrats to focus on building the party from the bottom up. Local elections, according to Dean, were just as important as national elections. The Democrats didn't take his message to heart, but Republicans have. Joining me now to talk about that is David Hersh. David, I think probably the thing that should scare Americans the most is they're focused on Citizens United. They're focused on McCutcheon only affecting those elections at the very top. They think, okay, well, this only involves the presidency. It only involves the Senate, the big beltway races. Nothing's further from the truth, though. We see we see right now that we're going all the way down to county commissioners and school board members. Tell us what's happening out there.
You know, Pap, the frightening thing about it is, and the leader in this area is really the Americans for Prosperity. They are working hard on their so-called ground game, where they're bringing politics and their national interests down to the local level, as you mentioned, even down to the school board level, down to individual tax level, all to advance their agenda. I think they really have two purposes in this, and we can chat about them. One is they have an interest in local elections, whether they're mayoral elections, whether they're city council elections, school board elections. They want to see their agenda advanced, and they're bringing big dollars in to local elections and local voting. And number two, they're continuing to refine and to build their local campaign organization where they have hundreds of people that are full-time employees nationwide, currently in 32 different states with multi-million-dollar budgets that they are preparing, honing, using the mid-year elections and the midterm elections so that when the national elections come along, we have more seats available. They've got their game in place and they're ready to go. So we're seeing this at a very local and even a micro level.
Well, yeah, the thing that's agonizing about it is this is what Howard Dean told the Democrats that they should have done 10 years ago. And of course, you had all the smart boys, the advisors for the Democrats that most of the time are just absolute failures, saying, no, we don't need to do that. We simply need to pay attention to Washington. We need to watch the Beltway. And while these idiots that were advising the Democrats, and the Democrats are easily led by the nose because they're not, most of the time, not very good critical thinkers, while they were being led around, what was happening is we had organizations building these grassroots, as you point out, going after superintendent races, school superintendent races, going after local trial judge races, going after county commissioner races. And I think what your point is extraordinarily important. It wasn't just to win the race. It was to have the infrastructure in place for the next time and the next time and the next time, just like Howard Dean said we should do.
And Pap, the frightening part about it is the Republican leader in this area, in the so-called dark money where you don't have to account for it, you don't have to tell where your donors are coming from, where the money's coming from. You can donate at a local level, spend money where it's going to have a huge impact. In 2014, in this series of elections that we had, outspent the Democrat forces by over 10 times. And so they're investing heavily in funds in these races, and they're investing to challenge, for example, Douglas County, right here in my backyard where my kids go to school. We had a school board election. The school board election, the issue really ended up being a union issue. And so the Americans for Prosperity were interested in making sure they got school board members who were anti-union. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, hired full-time employees to get out and appear to be grassroots, when in fact what they were is nothing more than hired national activists, came in, influenced the election, and lo and behold, they won all 5 of the seats that they backed, and now they have a voice in the policy at a school board level, and they're going to take this national at the next national election.
So it's not enough for them to, A, own the U.S. Supreme Court majority, which they obviously do. It's not enough for them to control the House by way of gerrymandering. It's not enough for them to own even the judiciary at the trial level and in the appellate level in the federal and state system. Now they simply think we have to control a county commissioner, for example, because that county commissioner may have a vote where it comes to fracking. Or we have to control a state legislator because that state legislator or representative or senator is going to have an impact maybe on offshore drilling here in Florida. It's gotten to where the micromanagement has gotten that involved to where virtually anybody running for office, there's a case I just saw where the entire city was 50,000 people. 50,000 people. But you had this national money coming into that election in this mayor's race there in this city of 50,000 because this was a mayor who simply didn't take orders from big money.
Lakeview, Minnesota is the city that you're talking about where they have a population of 50,000. Big money was spent to influence the mayoral election over the union issues and whether or not they'd be able to bust the union, whether or not they'd be able to step back from the unions. We had Iron County, Wisconsin, Board of County Commissioners. What was the issue? Regulations over mining, whether or not they were going to have a pro or anti-regulation mining set of county commissioners. Columbus, Ohio, forgive me for this. Columbus, Ohio, a zoo tax. They want to oppose the zoo tax. They want to have the influence that prevents taxes from being imposed. So they spent $20,000 on a local zoo tax referendum.
And this is
outrageous.
Just, right. So this is just soccer moms out there saying, we'd really like, I want to take Susie to see the giraffe. I want to take little Bobby to see the elephant. Here you have national money coming from places, like the Koch brothers. A lot of this money is being funneled by their organizations that say we're not only going to not let you, we're not going to let you decide who's president. We're not going to let you decide who sits on the Supreme Court. We're not going to let you decide who the zoo master is there in your hometown. I mean, that's how crazy this has become. And the average American doesn't understand this influence of money yet, do they?
Do not. The Koch brothers dumped money into Coralville, Iowa city council elections. 19,000 people in the city. The major complaint of the candidates were that they couldn't get local issues that they really wanted to address, graffiti problems, truancy problems, problems with the school district. They really couldn't get those issues out there because the Koch brothers organization had dumped so much money into the canvassing and the ads dealing with debt service and whether or not the city ought to take on more debt or be opposed to it, that the people who lived there were inundated with information that they couldn't even discuss the local issues. It's national politics that's playing out at the local level. And then, Pap, as I said, this is just a precursor. This game's been in place after the elections in 12. They reevaluated, they reshifted their strategies. They ran them out again in 14. They're now checking those out, seeing how they worked. We're going to see an even more effective use of these millions and millions and millions of dollars of dark money coming into local politics, influencing local politics, and really obliterating the opportunity for local candidates to have their voice heard.
God save the local dog catcher, right, David?
Absolutely. It's amazing.
Thank you for joining us. This is a story I wish people understood right now because it's critically important. Thank you for joining me, David.
You bet.
If you want to know what's wrong with the Democratic Party, all you have to do is look at the largest state in the Union, California. Democrats in California have been slowly moving further and further to the right, making them more like Republicans. This could have huge implications all over the country. I have Matt Edling with me to tell us what's happening. Matt, it looks like we can look at California and kind of see the way that the Democratic Party is kind of morphing into something that's almost not recognizable. It looks more like a Republican Party in many ways than it does a Democratic Party. And I guess we should expect that because the Republican Party is dead in California, and so now you have all the money moving to the Democrats, and they're turning Republican, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting where you had our current governor used to be the Moonbeam 25, 30 years ago,
right.
And now he's much more of a blue dog Democrat. And you're quite right. The Republican Party, if not dead, is certainly the pacemaker's pretty flat, where Governor Brown is going to easily win re-election. The only question is, will it be the greatest re-election majority ever in California?
Yeah.
And Governor.
So what we see happening, Matt, I mean, it used to be we would say, okay, the Democrats are not only good on social issues, they're good on things like civil rights and women's rights. They're good on on taking care of the least of our society. But we also used to say most of the time they were good on financial issues. They were willing to go to war with Wall Street when Wall Street started stealing money from mom and pop pension programs, when they started hustling people, hustling the money away. But now we see kind of the Democrats joining hands with this Wall Street movement, don't we?
We do. And I think if it's not a direct correlation, it's pretty close to where California obviously was coming, much like the rest of the country, coming through the recession, and we had budget crisis after budget crisis after budget crisis with a recall. Governor Brown has sort of reamped the state to be focused almost singularly around economic development, perhaps some would argue at the consequence of some of the more traditional democratic issues, including the financial protection of our consumers, our elderly, and those that are most disadvantaged. And you'll see that in the policies and the legislation coming out of Sacramento. It's driven by a fear of Governor Brown's veto. And if it is not a particular project that Governor Brown is entrenched around, such as high-speed rail, it looks much more of a traditional centrist, if not blue dog, perhaps even red piece of legislation.
So you have people, I like Bill Dodd out there. Nobody nationally would know who Bill Dodd is, but let's use him as kind of an example. Here's a guy that he's shameless about saying, yes, we are the new Democratic Party. And yes, we almost look a lot like the Republican Party, but my effort is to try to move the Democrats further to the middle. Now, so you got the Democrats saying, Bill Dodd type saying, I want to move further to the middle, and a lot of Democrats out there like Bill Dodd, who, by the way, used to be a Republican. But a lot of people like Bill Dodd saying we've got to move the Democrats closer to the middle. Well, the Republicans still continue moving to the right. So as you look at the numbers, the way this plays out, inevitably you're going to have a Democratic Party that is really no different from the old Republican Party. I don't see how you ever really get around that.
Yeah, using Bill Dodd as an example, and perhaps it's a little bit difficult with Dodd because we have a horrible drought in California. And Bill Dodd is in both what has traditionally been both progressive and driven by the wine industry. The wine industry is dependent upon water. And what has happened in California is we have your traditional environmentalists pitted against agriculture, both needing and wanting water. And Dodd, being a former Republican, has clearly aligned himself with the wine industry and big ag in California, which puts him squarely in what is, unfortunately for those of us who are more progressive Democrats, into the category of those who would side with Republican issues.
Of Republican. I mean, really, there's no other way to say it. And really, the problem is, let's move away from California. California, to me, is just a microcosm of what's going on. Now, you introduce Hillary Clinton to the field. Hillary Clinton now is just nothing more than a throwback to Bill Clinton, who brought us CAFTA, brought us NAFTA, brought us Robert Rubin, brought us Penny Pritzker, made this alliance to Wall Street like they are the new Democratic Party. And what I see happening nationally, I'm just wondering whether you see it happening there in California. It's almost a distraction. You hear the Democrats talking like they probably should on social issues. Whether it's immigration, whether it's women's rights, whether it's civil rights, they seem to be talking in ways that please what I call the Birkenstock Democrat, the person that only looks at those issues. But at the other side of their mouth, where it comes to money issues, they are killing the average American. Now, I see that happen nationally. Do you see the same trend out there in California?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think Governor Brown, in terms of his policies, is much more centrist than basically all of us predicted. I mean, you could use an example where this is a lawyer, a former attorney general, a former mayor of Oakland, which has enormous crime problems, and yet he has gutted the judiciary to where our courthouses are closing to average Americans. And I think if you were to take a look at the policies as a whole that Governor Brown has proffered and those that we expect, hopefully, soon to be President-elect Clinton, better her than a Republican, I think you'll see maybe not two sides of the same coin, but certainly the centrist Democrat in the Clintonian model. And, for average consumers, and let's just look at average consumers, how have average Americans done since 1970? Our median wages have not gone up, and the only economic development that has really happened here in America is inured to the benefit of the 1%. And now you're starting to even see people like Lloyd Blankenstein from Goldman saying, our tax base is wrong. Our policies are wrong. Warren Buffett, our policies are wrong. Everything is benefiting the 1%, and we are definitely into an age that looks much more like the Gilded Age that led to the Great Depression than anything that probably you or I have ever seen.
Well, the problem now, of course, I wonder whether I think Elizabeth Warren, frankly, would do well in California, if you want to know the truth. But there's this notion which Democrats are just so ridiculous about, and that is, right now, Bill Clinton says that Hillary Clinton is our best choice. Therefore, we must only pay attention to Hillary Clinton. Now, you and I probably disagree with this, but I'll tell you that I think it's a train wreck for Democrats. I think we should ignore that at all costs. But I think that, to me, the reason California is so important to watch, it's almost the litmus test, isn't it? It's almost like the canary in the cave down in the mine. That's what we see happening out there for the Democrats, don't we?
We do. And I mean, you can look at it. We passed cap and trade, although with a Republican governor, 10 years ago, and you saw that sort of kind of foster and fail in D.C. You'll see more progressive healthcare decisions out of California, and you saw what has been attempted and some would argue failed in Washington. And I think with Elizabeth Warren, I agree with you. I think she would do well. And I think the Democrats have to come to some sort of finding Jesus moment, which is, are we progressive Democrats, or are we just trying to elect somebody with a D, whether or not their policies are actually Democratic or Republican?
Yeah, I think the Democratic leadership has to realize that they're donkeys, not elephants, and that they seem to be struggling with that. Matt, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you. Have a good one, Mike.
The average American, unfortunately, there's some problems out there with what they know and understand. The average American, for most people, can't even name a single Supreme Court justice. They think to this day that Saddam Hussein was involved in 9/11, and too many voters still think that they might run into Bigfoot on their way to the polls. It's some scary stuff. I have author C.J. Whirlman with me to tell us why this is happening, and more importantly, why it's the problem. It's pretty obvious about why it's a problem, but CJ's a great columnist, writes for Alternate and Salon. He's the author of the new book, Crucifying America, The Unholy Alliance Between the Christian Right and Wall Street. Just an all-around, really smart person. CJ, great job on this article. The Americans are dangerously politically ignorant. You're unequivocal about it, aren't you?
Yeah, well, thanks, Mike, and thanks for the very, very kind the kind introduction. Happy to be on your show. But mate, I think what I touched on in this piece is something, as you alluded to, is very scary. That 91% of Americans can't name the current Chief Justice is alarming, and it's especially alarming considering the number of high-profile cases that we've had in the United States just in the last few years, everything from the Affordable Care Act to same-sex marriage and campaign finance laws. These are polarizing issues which have touch on the lives of most Americans, and yet nobody knows who's at the helm when it comes to deciding these cases.
I like the way you started your article, CJ. Your article talks about David Bratt from Virginia, and he gets up and just begins with this diatribe about how the framers of the Constitution absolutely wanted the Constitution to be based on Christian roots. I mean, that's what he was out there saying. Judeo-Christian roots is where all this came from, and that they acted on behalf of God to write the Constitution. And nobody questioned him about it. I mean, that's what's remarkable. Journalists, gone to school to be journalists, nobody asked the question, well, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, what he said is no different, really, to almost what is the Republican Party's platform. If you look at their platform, they believe that that's how the Constitution was written. They believed it was handed down by God, and what it doesn't make him the exception to the rule. I mean, he is only echoing what people like Sarah Palin to Ted Cruz will mutter in any public debate when it comes to the origins or the genesis of the Constitution.
Well, I mean, but that to me was a great framework to understanding that the overall incredible majority would really tell you that that where it comes to the framers of the Constitution, their whole intent was to make sure that they fashioned something consistent with Christianity, something consistent with the Old Testament and New Testament. Nothing was further from the truth. But it's worse than that. I mean, there's this collective ignorance that really seems to pervade it. It's a civic illiteracy almost, as I think you've described it. How bad, if you were to quantify, how bad is it? Where would you begin?
I think a great illustration of how bad it is the Affordable Care Act. Let's take Kentucky for instance. Now, if 25% of residents, when residents of Kentucky are asked how do they feel if they have a positive or a favorable view of the Affordable Care Act, only 25% will respond in favor. But if they're asked how do they view about Connect, which is the state exchange for the Affordable Care Act, more than half respond positively. Now, bearing in mind that both, the Connect is the state exchange for Obamacare. Now, that illiteracy in not understanding the difference and not understanding it's one and the same thing allows someone like Mitch McConnell to get away with saying, I still want to go ahead and repeal Obamacare, but we can keep connect. I mean, as one journalist said, that's like the Miami Heat saying we're going to trade LeBron James, but we're going to keep his jump shot.
Well, it's even crazier. In your article, you talk about 42% of Americans think that the Constitution explicitly, the U.S. Constitution explicitly states that the first language to be used in the United States is English. I haven't seen that. Taken many constitutional law courses, haven't seen it. 25% believe that Christianity was established in the Constitution. Now, verify that I'm not making that up.
No, that was a poll taken by the National Constitution Center in 2007. So, and that poll was taken from a wide sample across, the entire breadth of the United States. So, I don't think this poll is something that's in isolation. I think this is truly reflected not only by this poll, but anytime you turn on Fox News or any part of the right-wing echo chamber, you will hear right-wing Republican politicians echo sentiments which drive to those points. And like you mentioned earlier, the media never calls them out. I mean, I think in what I said at the end of the piece is the media is part of the problem, and the mainstream media, because there's this nauseating drive to be impartial at all costs, and the conflating of opinion with fact allows people to get away with saying stupid stuff. So,
in other words, if you have Republicans come up and say there's no such thing as gravity, and the Democrats say, well, there is gravity, CNN would put you on the air in a debate of whether or not gravity exists, just like we're seeing with virtually everything right now.
And then CNN stands back and says, look, Democrats and Republicans are fighting again.
Well, and the commentator may even say, people disagree. I mean, that's how crazy. People disagree. Gravity is real. But you see, where does that... I was a journalism major back at University of Florida. And, of course, that was back in, mid-'70s, early '80s. And what we were taught then was, you got to tell the story on both sides, but you don't buy into stupid. It's not your role as a journalist to buy in and then promulgate stupid. That is the new standard in journalism now. And really, CJ, the people that are critical of journalism these days say that even the typical journalist coming out of school doesn't have the fundamental education to understand complex issues themselves. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's all the continued dumbing down of society. I mean, that the media was never like that, and you mentioned that. Today, stupid gets to propagate because it's never challenged. I mean, you only have to look at that in the debate when it comes to climate change. Now, climate change in this country is presented as a political partisan issue, whereas in the rest of the Western world, it's just treated as fact. And anybody comes on the media and says this is, a liberal conspiracy to make Al Gore rich, is quickly shut down out of the debate. But here, when you've got 97.9% of the scientific community saying climate change is happening and it's man-made and it's happening right now, but you have the Republican Party or somebody who's paid by the Koch brothers to get on the media and say it's just a liberal hoax, then it's presented, that opinion is presented as a fact. And that's, coming back to this piece again with David Bratz, he's able to say what he said about the Constitution, and it's not challenged. Fact, opinion isn't challenged and facts are left uncovered.
Well, part of the problem when we're talking about media, part of the problem here is it's a corporate media, you see. And you have the corporation that has the advertiser or the political entity that puts pressure on them to do something as stupid as saying, well, look, the Republicans don't believe in such things as gravity. The Democrats do. So let's put them on Sunday talk shows and let's let them talk about something. And the person watching it says, well, my God, there must be some question about gravity. All these years I thought there was gravity, but maybe there's not because the commentator on CNN says it's an issue to be determined. Isn't there another side? And I love the way you nail this, CJ. I love this. I'm kind of a fan of Brecht also. And you talk about Bertolt Brecht, 20th century German playwright. He wrote this great piece about the need for avoiding the political illiterate. Why must we do that? And he says in there that it's interesting that the political illiterate is the first one to stand up and crow like a rooster and beat on their chest and say, well, it's not important to me because I hate politics. That I thought that was interesting, because if you really drill down, the person who hates politics doesn't pay attention is in big trouble, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And, to finish that quote from Brecht, he says, the imbecile doesn't know that from his political ignorance is born the prostitute, the abandoned child, and the worst seeds of all, the bad politician. And that's exactly it. And I think politics has become so polarized in this country that so many people have switched off, and it's because of the media. So, as you said, you have a gravity debate on CNN. They have the split screen, and you think, my God, there is another theory to gravity that I don't know about, and there belies the problem. And because it's become so polarized, politics in this country, people if you go to Europe or you go to Australia, people openly talk about politics. It's a healthy conversation to have around the dinner table. But in this country, as soon as you mention politics, people shy away, people don't do it, or they take the opposite tack. It just becomes infantile emotionalism, they're screaming, Obama's a socialist, Marxist, fascist is coming to take your gun.
They don't know enough for the intelligent conversation. CJ, thank you for joining us. Okay, great book, Crucifying America, and everything you write is just spectacular. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.